Yo, what's good? Unexpected one back at it again. Yo, this time I wanted to do a video dealing with something I seen over the years, heard over the years, whether online, not so much out here in these streets and on in my normal encounters, which is phenomenal. But too often have I heard this foolishness, this myth that MMA is real fighting. And folks want to say it's a more realistic situation. I could go into a whole hour, 2 hour long thing about that, but I'm not going there. I respect MMA, love the UFC, love different organizations that do it. But I will also be having a series of video, the flaws of MMA. Anyways, I've been hearing this as a downplay to boxing, as a downplay to a lot of martial arts over the years, as a downplay to a lot of different fighting styles, even though a lot of those fighting styles are used in MMA, which makes no sense. But people are saying, well, you need to do this, you need to do that. Well, if you specialize in this, that doesn't count. And that's just not accurate. It's a complete myth. It shows that someone hasn't gotten into altercations, hasn't gotten into real fights, if you will, hasn't gotten into street fights. All right. And I'll break down all the reasons as to why this doesn't make sense. Number one, most fights, all right, specifically street fights, are 30 seconds or less. They're not long encounters. They're not long, drawn out affairs. All right. They're very quick encounters. If it does go into a greater encounter, of course, someone who has more skills has a better shot. There's a lot of other factors as well. Number two, you're rarely going to be fighting actual martial artists if you get into fights. All right. You want to try to de-escalate situations. You want to avoid conflict, of course. If you can get away, fine. But if it comes down to throwing these hands or even armed combat, you're rarely going to find people who are capable and are knowledgeable who are going to fight, because they're disciplined, self-controlled, and more. Most fighters who are skilled understand how much damage they can do. They understand what they can inflict, and a lot of them have moral codes and have a lot of experience and a lot of lethal techniques, or their minds can turn a switch and can damage you in good amounts of ways. They will use the environment against you. And that's point number three. The environment of most fights are not conducive to what a lot of the things you will see in the octagon. It's just not reality. All right. Number four, if you, as I alluded to earlier, if you're proficient in any martial art or any fighting style, if you're a street fighter, a brawler, a boxer, a bare knuckle boxer, a karateka, a judoka, aikidoka, if you Muay Thai, Taekwondo, Kung Fu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and a whole other thing, Krav Maga, you name it, you have so much more potential to win in that encounter than someone who's not. And in some cases, even against multiple people. Most people do not know how to throw hands. They are not adequately trained to fight, and many of them are not adequately trained to take a lot of punishment and damage. People are like, oh, there's more training than ever. Not really. A lot of people are not trained properly. Besides, just a little bit of experience doesn't mean you're skilled. That doesn't matter if you're shooting a gun. That doesn't matter if you're playing a sport. That doesn't matter. Any form of weapon, whether it be hands, bows, knees, feet, knives, swords, bows, staves, guns, anything you use needs to be trained. So those are those simple things. Also, in MMA, you don't have weapons. You don't have knife play. You don't have all forms of blades. You don't have bottles. You don't have firearms. You don't have a lot of things you could bring to the table. You don't just have random projectiles, bricks, or anything you can hit. Well, you don't face bats, bro, if those come into play. So how do you can say that's a real fight? Also, the UFC specifically disallowed from the jump shoes. Ken Shamrock, who was a pro wrestler, could not use his shoes against Royce Gracie. All right. You don't. It doesn't allow eye gouging. It doesn't allow for biting. It doesn't allow for a lot of lethal techniques. So, as far as I know, attacks to the throat are not allowed. Attacks to the groin are not allowed. Um, Also, a lot of holds that certain martial arts use affect with gi and clothing, loose wear. That's You don't see that at least any longer since the Vale Tudo days of the UFC, of a lot of MMA. A lot of guys are shirtless, which is fine, just like boxing. But boxing is just striking martial art, so it's a completely different thing. Also, you have to take into consideration that a lot of the locks, a lot of the techniques of a lot of martial arts are lethal. The martial arts were made for lethal competition, lethal combat. All right, they're not meant for just sport. All right, they're not. The martial arts are not meant for sport. Now, I'm definitely not opposed to pro fighting. In fact, I encourage it. I wish for more like bare knuckle boxing and other things I could address at another time. But my point is, this whole thing about MMA being real fighting is just not accurate. All right, the octagon is a specific format, or the ring in some cases of certain organizations is a specific format. It allows for certain things. There are certain rules out on the streets. While there are not inherently no rules, the main rule is anything goes, and the biggest rule above anything goes is survival. When I'm in a real fight, a street fight, my mentality, specifically mine, is survival. All right, either one or I will. And a lot of times I've learned control over the years, thanks to martial arts, thanks to fighting experience, thanks to a lot of things. Now, I haven't had this great pedigree and a lot of training, but I have been exposed to, and I have been around, and I naturally have a lot of self control because of sports and otherwise. But if I'm in a fight, and if it gets really serious enough, and I knew the dude is not some clown that I can easily deal with, that's another story for another time. I literally will be in the mindset of fighting for survival. Either one or both of us are going unconscious, if not worse, potential death, unless someone breaks it up, which I could tell stories about that. So I just wanted to